Act 1. Building the Dream Ship. Close your eyes and let yourself drift back in time, back to a crisp spring morning in Belfast, Ireland, March 31st, 1909. On this day, in the vast Queen's Yard of the Harland and Wolff Shipbuilding Company, something extraordinary began. The keel was laid for a ship that would capture the world's imagination. A ship known simply by her yard number at first, 401. But she would soon have a name that echoed through history. Titanic. Take a slow, deep breath and imagine standing at the edge of that shipyard, feeling the cool Irish breeze, hearing the distant clang of metal on metal, watching as the very foundation of a dream begins to take shape. Building a ship of this magnitude had never been attempted before. The existing facilities, the cranes, the gantries, the workshops, none of them were large enough. And so, Harland and Wolff did something remarkable. They built new structures, massive steel frameworks called Arrol gantries, rising 228 feet into the Belfast sky, almost as tall as a 20-story building, towering over the shipyard like metal giants, silently lifting tons of steel and iron, day after day, piece by piece. Let your breathing slow, in and out, as you picture these enormous structures moving in steady rhythm, hoisting materials that would become part of something legendary. For 26 months, the work continued. 26 months of careful planning, precise engineering, and tireless labor. About 3,000 workers, nearly 20% of the shipyard's entire workforce at its peak, focused on this single vessel. Imagine that, out of 15,000 skilled craftsmen, 3,000 dedicated their days, and sometimes their nights, to bringing Titanic to life. These weren't just workers, they were artisans, riveters and platers, engineers and carpenters, painters and electricians, each one playing their part in this grand orchestra of construction. The sound of hammers, the hiss of steam, the glow of welding torches against the gray Belfast sky, all of it blending together in a symphony of creation. Breathe deeply and let the rhythm of their work become the rhythm of your own breath, steady, reliable, constant. When she was finally complete, Titanic stretched 882 feet from bow to stern, nearly 3 football fields in length. To hold her together, over 3 million rivets, 3 million individual pieces of metal, each one heated, hammered, and set by hand. And beneath them, 2,000 massive steel plates, forming the hull that would carry passengers across the Atlantic. She was the largest passenger liner the world had ever seen. A floating palace, a testament to human ambition and engineering prowess. Feel yourself sinking deeper now, into relaxation, as we explore what made this ship move, what gave her life. Deep in Titanic's hull, in spaces most passengers would never see, were her engines, not just one, but 3. 2 enormous reciprocating steam engines, their pistons rising and falling like mechanical lungs, breathing steam instead of air, and in the center, a low-pressure turbine, taking the exhaust steam from the other 2 engines and extracting every last bit of power from it. Together, These 3 engines could generate 46,000 horsepower. Imagine that power humming through the ship, turning the massive triple screws, the propellers that would push this giant through the ocean at speeds approaching 24 knots. Let that hum, that imagined vibration of power, ease you further into calm, into rest. But even the most magnificent ship, built with such care and precision, can have hidden vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities that wouldn't be understood until it was too late. Titanic's designers had included safety features, watertight compartments, separated by strong bulkheads that could be closed, sealing off damaged sections. It seemed ingenious, and it was, to a point. But these bulkheads, these walls that were meant to save the ship, only rose as high as E-deck. If water filled one compartment beyond that height, it could simply spill over into the next compartment, like water flowing from one ice cube tray section to another. Breathe slowly. There's no urgency here, just the gentle flow of information, washing over you like waves. And there was something else, something in the very rivets that held her together. At the bow, the forward section of the ship, the builders used wrought iron rivets. Iron, not steel. They were weaker, more prone to failure under stress. The stern, the rear of the ship, used stronger steel rivets. But at the front, where the ship would one day meet an iceberg in the dark Atlantic night, the rivets were iron. No one could have known on those bright Belfast mornings, as the gantries lifted steel plates into place, as workers hammered rivets that would hold for years, that these small decisions, these tiny details, would matter so profoundly. For now, as you drift towards sleep, picture Titanic as she was meant to be. A triumph, a dream made real, the finest ship afloat, gleaming in the Irish sun, waiting for her maiden voyage. Let yourself rest in this moment before everything changed, when Titanic was still just a beautiful promise, a magnificent achievement, a ship of dreams. Rest now and breathe, slowly, peacefully, as we prepare to continue this journey, together, into the gentle night. Act 2. Life on board. Luxury, class, and the people. Let yourself settle. A little deeper now, as we step aboard Titanic and walk her decks, meeting the souls who called her home. If only for a brief time, breathe slowly and imagine the grandeur, the sheer magnificence of stepping into first class. For those wealthy enough to afford it, Titanic offered luxuries that seemed almost unimaginable. There was a heated swimming pool, warm water, gently rippling, lit by electric lights. An oasis of calm in the middle of the ocean. The first heated pool ever built on a ship, reserved exclusively for first-class passengers. Picture yourself in those peaceful waters, the warmth embracing you, the gentle motion of the ship, barely noticeable, just a subtle sway as you float, weightless, relaxed. And if you wanted exercise, there was a gymnasium, equipped with the latest mechanical wonders of 1912. Mechanical horses that simulated riding, stationary bicycles, rowing machines, all gleaming wood and leather. and metal. Of course, this privilege came at an extra cost, even for first-class passengers. But for those who could afford it, it was another marvel. Another reason to believe this ship was the height of civilization. Let your muscles relax now, as if you've just finished a gentle workout. That pleasant tiredness sinking into comfort. But Titanic, like the world she sailed through, was a ship of stark contrasts. Down below, in third class, nearly 700 passengers, families seeking new lives in America, immigrants carrying dreams and hopes in worn suitcases, shared just 2 bathtubs, 2 for 700 people, while first class bathed in private marble bathrooms with hot and cold running water. Third class waited in lines for their brief turn at cleanliness. It's a reminder, as you drift towards sleep, of how differently we all experience the same journey, the same ship, the same ocean, but vastly different worlds, separated by decks and doors and the accident of wealth. Breathe and let any judgment fade away. This is simply how things were. A moment in time, now long past. On this voyage, Titanic carried about 2,223 people, far below her capacity of 3,547. She had room to spare, empty cabins, unused berths. Among those aboard were 13 honeymooning couples, starting their lives together, full of hope and love, sailing toward what they believed would be a beautiful future. Think of them, young and in love, walking the boat deck hand in hand, watching the stars, believing in forever. Among the passengers were people whose names you might recognize, even now, more than a century later. John Jacob Astor IV, one of the wealthiest men in the world, traveled with his young pregnant wife Madeline. He was 47, she was 18, and they were returning to America after an extended honeymoon abroad, hoping to escape the scandal their marriage had caused. When disaster struck, Astor tried, some say he even disguised himself, to board a lifeboat with his wife. But the rule was firm: women and children first. He was refused. He helped Madeline into Lifeboat 4, asked an officer if he might join her, given her condition, and was told no. He stepped back, lit a cigarette, and was never seen alive again. His body was recovered days later, carrying $2,500 in cash and a gold watch that had stopped in the cold Atlantic water. Let that image fade, gently, like smoke, as we meet another couple whose love story touches the heart even now. Isidore and Ida Strauss, owners of Macy's department store, were in their 60s, married for over 40 years. When the ship began to sink, Isidore tried to convince Ida to get into a lifeboat. She refused. She had stayed by his side for decades, and she would not leave him now. "Where you go, I go," she said. Witnesses saw her give her fur coat, warm and expensive, to her maid, and insist the young woman take her place in the boat. Then Isidore and Ida sat down together, in deck chairs, holding hands as the ship tilted beneath them. Both perished, together, as they had lived. Breathe slowly, and feel the peace in choosing love, even in the face of fear. Among Titanic's cargo was something quite unusual for a ship, a Renault Type CE automobile, one of the finest cars of its era. It belonged to William Carter, a first-class passenger. The car was never driven, never used, just stored in the hold, waiting to be unloaded in New York. It never arrived. The car sank with the ship, resting now somewhere in the deep, still insured for $20,000, which would be worth millions today. Imagine it, down there in the darkness, a beautiful machine, frozen in time. Let that image carry you deeper, into rest, into the quiet depths of sleep. In the ship's mail hold, 5 postal clerks worked tirelessly, sorting 7 million pieces of mail, letters from home, business documents, postcards, and parcels. When water began flooding the hold, the clerks worked frantically, moving mail bags to higher decks, trying to save what they could. They worked until the water became too deep, until they couldn't work anymore. All 5 clerks perished, but in the days after the sinking, sealed mail bags washed ashore, letters still dry inside, messages from the lost, delivered after all. And there were other passengers aboard who could not speak, could not understand what was happening. Dogs, traveling in first-class kennels, pampered pets of wealthy passengers. When the evacuation began, some owners went to the kennels, releasing their dogs, or carrying small ones onto lifeboats. A Pomeranian, a Pekingese, 2 small dogs survived in the arms of their owners. But most pets, the larger dogs, remained behind, locked in cages or wandering the tilting decks, confused and afraid. As the ship went down, let yourself release any sadness, as you would release a breath, gently, completely. Titanic was a world unto itself, carrying the rich and the poor, the famous and the unknown, the old and the young, newlyweds and long-time companions, even beloved pets, each with their own story, their own dreams, their own reasons for being there, on that ship, on that night. As you drift now toward deeper rest, picture the ship as she was, in her brief moment of glory, lit up against the dark Atlantic, music playing in the salons, laughter echoing in the hallways, people living their lives, unaware of what was coming, simply being human, together, on the journey. Rest now in the space between their world and yours, as the gentle waves of sleep carry you away, softly, peacefully, into the night. Act 3. The voyage begins, and early warning signs. Let yourself breathe slowly now, as we return to the beginning, to the moment when Titanic finally was ready to sail. But before we board, before the voyage begins, we must acknowledge a darker truth, a shadow that fell across the ship even before she touched the water. Titanic's story did not begin with triumph alone. There was tragedy, even in her creation. During her launch on May 31st, 1911, when the massive hull slid down the slipway into Belfast Harbor, workers were there, guiding her, supporting the process. In the chaos, the movement of such enormous weight. Accidents happened. Men were crushed, caught between the ship and the structures around her, victims of the very thing they had helped to build. And during the construction itself, over those 26 months of labor, there were deaths, falls from height, accidents with machinery, the dangers inherent in working with such massive scale. At least 8 men are known to have died building Titanic. 8 lives given before a single passenger ever stepped aboard. Breathe and hold space for them. These forgotten souls, whose sacrifice is part of the story, though rarely told. Let any heaviness flow through you and away like water, returning to the sea. But then she was complete, magnificent, ready. The world's largest moving object, painted in black and white and buff, funnels reaching skyward, a floating palace, waiting for her maiden voyage. April 10th, 1912. Southampton, England. A port city on the southern coast, bustling with activity. Crowds gathering to see the great ship depart. Passengers arrived by train, luggage piled high, steamer trunks and hat boxes. Families saying goodbye, handkerchiefs waving. Picture yourself there, on the dock, feeling the excitement, the energy, the smell of coal smoke, the sound of the ship's whistles, deep and resonant, announcing her presence to the world. At noon, precisely noon, Titanic's lines were cast off. Tugboats, small and sturdy, pulled her away from the dock. She began to move, slowly, majestically, out into the harbor. Her engines, those 3 mighty engines we spoke of earlier, came to life, propellers turning, pushing water, driving her forward. Thousands watched, from the shore, from other ships. This was history unfolding before their eyes. But even in departure, there was a sign, a warning that went unheeded. As Titanic moved through the harbor, passing the ships moored there, her enormous size, her displacement of water, created suction. The SS New York, a smaller liner, tied to her berth nearby, suddenly strained against her mooring ropes. The ropes grew taut, vibrating with tension, and then snapped, like whip cracks. The New York, pulled by Titanic's wake, swung out, drifting toward the larger ship on a collision course. For several tense minutes, disaster seemed inevitable, a collision, before even leaving port. But tugboats rushed in, engines straining, pushing the New York away, pulling Titanic to safety. The ships passed, with feet to spare. The crowd, which had gasped in fear, now cheered. Crisis averted. Titanic continued on, delayed by only an hour, as if nothing had happened. But some later remembered this moment. Some said it was an omen, the ship asserting her power, even over other vessels, drawing them into danger through sheer force of her presence. Breathe slowly and let that image fade into the background as Titanic steams away from England toward the open sea. Her first stop was Cherbourg, France, a port on the northern coast where more passengers waited. Titanic was too large to dock at Cherbourg's pier, so she anchored offshore, Tender boats, smaller vessels, ferried passengers out to the ship. First class, second class, third class, all boarding, finding their cabins, beginning their journey. Among those who boarded at Cherbourg were some of the wealthiest passengers. Margaret Molly Brown, the American socialite. Benjamin Guggenheim, the millionaire businessman. They climbed the gangway, stepped onto the ship, and entered a world of luxury beyond anything most people could imagine. Let yourself picture it. The polished wood, the thick carpets, the electric lights gleaming of crystal and brass, the sense of being in the finest hotel while simultaneously floating on the ocean. From Cherbourg, Titanic sailed overnight, arriving at Queenstown, Ireland, now known as Cobh, on the morning of April 11th. Again, tender boats ferried passengers, this time mostly third class. Irish immigrants, families, young men and women, seeking new lives in America. They carried their belongings in cloth bundles and worn suitcases, boarded the ship with hope and dreams of what awaited them across the Atlantic. Among those who boarded was a young woman who would later become famous, though not for reasons she could have imagined. But we'll meet her in time. Also at Queenstown, 7 passengers chose to disembark, changed their minds, decided not to continue. 7 people who would later be called the luckiest people in the world. We cannot know what made them leave. A premonition, a change of plans, a feeling they couldn't explain. But they stepped off Titanic and lived, while others stayed and did not. Breathe deeply and consider the mysteries of fate, of choice, of timing. At 1:30 p.m., April 11th, 1912, Titanic raised anchor for the last time. She steamed out of Queenstown Harbor, past the green hills of Ireland, into the open Atlantic. Ahead of her, 1,800 miles of ocean, and then New York, and the completion of her maiden voyage. The passengers settled into their routines. First class enjoyed elaborate meals in the grand dining saloon, promenaded on the boat deck, took tea in the Palm Court. Second class had their own dining room, their own library, comfortable if not lavish. Third class gathered in their general room, played music, danced, told stories, made friends. The ship steamed westward, day after day. April 11th, the 12th, the 13th. The weather was calm, the sea relatively smooth. Everything proceeding exactly as planned. In the Marconi room, the wireless operators sent messages for passengers, received messages in return, personal telegrams, stock reports, love letters transmitted across the void, and occasionally, messages from other ships, reports of weather, reports of ice. But these were routine. Ice was common in the North Atlantic in April. Nothing to worry about. Captains navigated around it all the time. Titanic was large, strong, modern. The ice was just another navigable hazard, nothing more. As April 14th dawned, Titanic had traveled over 1,000 miles. She was making excellent time at the current speed. She would arrive in New York on Wednesday morning, April 17th. Passengers were already planning what they would do first when they reached America. The morning was beautiful, clear, cold, but calm. The sea, like glass, perfect conditions for an Atlantic crossing. And so, as the day progressed, as we've already discussed, ice warnings came in. 6 of them, noted, posted, some delivered to the bridge, some not. The ship steamed on, westward, toward New York, toward destiny. As evening approached, passengers dressed for dinner. The orchestra began to play. Laughter and conversation filled the public rooms. Everything was as it should be. Normal, peaceful, safe. And Titanic sailed on through the calm seas, under the emerging stars, toward the ice that waited in the darkness ahead. Rest now in this moment of peace before the change. Let the gentle rhythm of the engines, the imagined sway of the deck, carry you deeper into relaxation, into sleep. The voyage continues. The story unfolds, and you drift peacefully through the night, warm and safe, as dreams begin to find you. Breathe and let go and sleep. Act 4, April 14. The night everything changes. Settle yourself now into stillness as we arrive at a day, a single day, that would change everything. April 14th, 1912. The morning dawned clear and calm. The ocean like glass, stretching endlessly in all directions. Titanic steamed westward toward America, toward New York, making good time, cutting through the smooth water with confident grace. Captain Edward Smith, a veteran of the seas, white-bearded and respected, known affectionately as the Millionaire's Captain, had planned a lifeboat drill for that day, a routine exercise, getting passengers familiar with the procedures, the lifeboats, the davits and ropes, just in case, just to be prepared. But the day was so beautiful, the sea so calm, the ship so magnificent and new. The drill was cancelled. Perhaps it seemed unnecessary. Perhaps there were other priorities. Perhaps it was simply postponed. We'll never know for certain. But the drill never happened. Breathe slowly. There's no need to rush. No need for worry. Just the gentle unfolding of what was. As the day progressed, the wireless operators in the Marconi room, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, received messages, ice warnings from other ships in the area. One warning, then another, then another. By the end of the day, 6 warnings total. Each one reporting ice, icebergs, field ice, drifting in the waters ahead. Some warnings reached the bridge. Some were delivered to Captain Smith. Some were simply posted, noted. One was never delivered at all because the wireless operators were too busy sending personal messages, telegrams for passengers, wealthy travelers communicating with the shore. Picture the telegraph key, clicking rhythmically, dots and dashes, messages flying through the air, invisible, electric, crossing vast distances in an instant. The operators, working in shifts, in their small room, surrounded by the hum of equipment, the spark of the wireless, modern technology, connecting Titanic to the world. Let that rhythm, that clicking, become part of your breathing, in and out, steady, peaceful. As night fell, the temperature dropped. The air grew cold, bitter cold, the kind of cold that bites at exposed skin. Passengers retreated indoors, to the warmth of the lounges and dining rooms, to after-dinner drinks and card games, to conversations and laughter. The sea remained calm, unnaturally calm, not a ripple, not a wave, just smooth dark water, stretching away into the night. No moon, but stars, thousands of stars, brilliant against the black sky, reflecting on the mirror-like surface of the ocean. It was beautiful, hauntingly beautiful, a night to remember. 11:40 p.m. High in the crow's nest, lookouts Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee stood watch, scanning the horizon, eyes straining in the darkness. They had no binoculars. The binoculars were locked away, the key misplaced. Just their eyes, and their experience, and the cold night air. And then, Fleet saw it. Dead ahead. A dark shape, a massive presence, emerging from the darkness. An iceberg. He rang the bell 3 times, grabbed the telephone, connected to the bridge. Iceberg, right ahead. Breathe, and picture that moment, the sudden clarity, the rush of understanding. Ice, directly in their path. On the bridge, First Officer William Murdoch, in command at that moment, reacted instantly. Hard a starboard. The helmsman spun the wheel. The ship, 46,000 tons of steel and luxury, began to turn. Slowly, so slowly, her bow swinging left, turning away from the ice. But Titanic was moving at nearly full speed, 22 knots, through an ice field, on a dark night. She was too big, moving too fast, turning too slowly. 37 seconds from sighting to impact. At 11:40 p.m., with a sound described as a long grinding scrape, like tearing canvas or rolling thunder heard from a distance, Titanic struck the iceberg on her starboard side, the right side, as she tried desperately to turn away. Some passengers felt nothing, just a slight jar, a subtle shudder. In the first-class lounge, card games continued. In cabins, people slept. On deck, a few passengers saw ice, chunks of it, falling onto the forward well deck, and joked about it. Picked up pieces to take to their cabins. Souvenirs of the collision. It seemed almost nothing. A bump. An inconvenience. Certainly not a catastrophe. But below the waterline, where no one could see, the damage was done. Not a single long gash, as many would later imagine, but something more insidious. Multiple small openings, thin separations in the hull plates, rivets failing under the force, popping out like buttons. Along 300 feet of the starboard side, The hull was compromised. Water. Cold Atlantic water, 28 degrees, began pouring in. 5 compartments, flooding simultaneously. The mail hold, the squash court, boiler room 6, boiler room 5, the forward compartments. Water, rising inexorably. Breathe, and let yourself remain calm as we watch, as we bear witness to what came next. Down in the mail hold, the postal clerks, working as they always did, noticed water, ankle deep, then knee deep. They grabbed mail bags, tried to move them higher. But the water kept rising. In the Marconi room, Jack Phillips, still sending passenger messages, was interrupted. The captain entered, told him to prepare to send a distress call. Phillips nodded, adjusted his equipment, and began. CQD, 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 the traditional distress signal. Then, the newer signal, SOS, 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 over and over, into the night. Wireless signals radiating outward, across the dark ocean, searching for help. 30 messages, more than 30, sent in the hours that followed. Titanic calling. Anyone, everyone, we are sinking. We need help. Come quickly. 58 miles away. The steamship Carpathia received the message. Captain Arthur Rostron, woken from sleep, immediately ordered his ship to turn, to steam at full speed, through the same ice field, toward Titanic's position. But 58 miles, at maximum speed, would take nearly 4 hours. 4 hours. Let yourself breathe, deeply, slowly, as time stretches. As we hold this moment, before everything changed. The night remained calm, the stars still brilliant overhead, the water still smooth as glass, and Titanic, her lights blazing, sat in the water, tilting slowly forward as the ocean, relentless and cold, poured into her wounded hull. People began to understand, gradually, reluctantly. This was serious. The unsinkable ship was sinking. Rest now, in this moment between safety and disaster, between certainty and fear. Let the darkness of sleep embrace you gently as we prepare to witness what came next. The clicking of the telegraph, the cold stars above, the calm dark water below, all of it, fading now into the peaceful depth of your dreams. Sleep and breathe, and let the story carry you softly away. Act 5, the last 2 hours and 40 minutes. Close your eyes and let yourself be present for the final hours of a ship and the souls aboard her. 2 hours and 40 minutes from impact to the end. Not long when measured in clock time, but an eternity when you're living through it. Breathe slowly as we watch the lifeboats being prepared. The crew moved along the boat deck, uncovering the lifeboats, swinging them out on their davits, preparing to load passengers. But there was confusion, hesitation. Many crew members had never participated in a proper lifeboat drill. They didn't know the procedures, didn't know the capacity, didn't truly believe that this ship could sink. The unsinkable ship. That's what they'd been told. What everyone believed. So when officers called for women and children, many passengers refused. Refused to leave the warm, brightly lit ship for a small wooden boat. Hanging over the dark ocean, it seemed safer to stay. It seemed impossible that Titanic could actually go down. And so the lifeboats launched, one by one, with empty seats. Lifeboat 1, designed to hold 40 people, left with only 12 aboard. Lifeboat 7, the first to launch, carried only 28 when it could have held 65. Precious spaces wasted because no one truly believed until it was too late. Let your breathing slow as we witness these moments, these choices made in confusion and disbelief. There was a story that emerged later, causing controversy and shame. The last person to board lifeboat number 1 was reportedly a crewman, disguised as a woman, wearing a shawl, perhaps a skirt, taking a space that belonged to someone else. We cannot know for certain if this happened, or exactly who it was, but the story persisted, a reminder of how fear can break down the codes we live by, how survival can make people do desperate things. Breathe and release any judgment. None of us know what we would do in those circumstances. On the boat deck, as the situation grew more dire, as the tilt of the ship became unmistakable, the ship's band, 8 musicians, gathered with their instruments. Violinist Wallace Hartley, the band leader, began to play. The others joined him. Ragtime tunes at first, cheerful, upbeat, meant to keep spirits high, to maintain calm. Alexander's ragtime band. In the shadows, music floating across the cold night air, incongruous and beautiful. As the end drew near, witnesses later reported, the band played a hymn. Many believed it was "Nearer, My God, to Thee," a sacred song, a prayer in music form. We cannot be certain what they played last, but we know they played until the very end, until the water reached them, standing in their uniforms, instruments in hand, giving their last gift to those around them. All 8 musicians perished. Their bodies were later recovered, still in their band uniforms. Instruments lost to the sea. Let the music, imagined and distant, wash over you now, a lullaby from across the years. The water, the ocean surrounding Titanic, was -2 degrees Celsius, below freezing, kept liquid only by the salt. To fall into that water meant death within 15 minutes from hypothermia. The cold, so intense, it felt like knives, like fire. Paradoxically, the body's core temperature plummeting, consciousness fading, muscles refusing to work. 15 minutes from immersion to death. That's all the time you had. And yet, there was one man who defied these odds through sheer improbability. Charles Jaugen, the ship's chief baker, spent the final hours drinking, whiskey liberally consumed, as he helped load lifeboats, threw deck chairs overboard for people to cling to, acted with remarkable calm. When the ship finally went down, Jauchen rode it, stepping off as the stern rose vertical, barely getting his hair wet. He survived in that freezing water for over 2 hours. 2 hours. When others died in 15 minutes. He later attributed his survival to the alcohol in his system, keeping his blood vessels dilated, maintaining circulation. Medical experts remain skeptical, but Jauchen lived, picked up by a lifeboat eventually, suffering only swollen feet. Sometimes the universe offers small miracles, even in catastrophe. Breathe deeply and picture the ship now, in her final moments. 2:18 a.m., nearly 2 hours and 40 minutes after the collision. Titanic could hold together no longer. The forward section, flooded and heavy, pulled downward. The stern rose higher and higher, lifting out of the water, propellers visible against the stars. The stress, the strain, the force of 46,000 tons being torn apart. And then she broke. Between the third and fourth funnels, the hull fractured. A sound like thunder, like an explosion, metal screaming, rivets failing, assayant everything inside, sliding, crashing, tumbling forward. The grand staircase, that magnificent centerpiece, 60 feet tall, oak paneling gleaming, topped with a glass dome and wrought iron cherub, holding a lamp, collapsed entirely. The chandelier, the carved wood, the symbol of luxury and elegance, all of it, destroyed in an instant. The bow section, already submerged, broke free and began its descent to the ocean floor. 2.5 miles below. The stern briefly settled back, almost level, floating for perhaps a minute, lights still burning, then began its own final plunge. Vertical, pointing to the stars, hanging there. Impossible. Surreal, then sliding, faster and faster. Into the depths. At 2:20 a.m., Titanic was gone, disappeared beneath the surface, leaving only wreckage, debris, deck chairs and doors and papers, and over 1,500 people in the water, crying out, calling for help. That would not come in time. The lifeboats nearby, many still with empty seats, rowed away. Officers afraid that the desperate swimmers would swamp the boats if they tried to rescue them. Only one lifeboat, Lifeboat 14, commanded by 5th Officer Harold Lowe, went back. They saved 4 people, 4 from over 1,000. Within minutes, the cries faded. The cold doing its work. Silence fell over the water, just the gentle lapping of waves against the lifeboats and the stars above, unchanging, eternal, bearing witness. Let yourself rest now in that silence, the tragedy complete, the story told. Nothing left but the waiting for dawn, for rescue, for understanding. Breathe slowly and let the darkness become peaceful. Let the cold fade away. You are safe, warm, drifting now toward sleep, toward dreams, where there is no ice, no sinking ship, just quiet and rest. The ocean holds its secrets. The stars keep their vigil, and you drift gently away into the deep, peaceful sleep. Rest now. Rest and let go. Act 6. The Wreck. Discovery, evidence, and slow disappearance. Settle yourself now as we journey forward in time, 73 years forward from that cold April night to September 1985. The wreck of Titanic, lost since 1912, rested somewhere in the North Atlantic, 2.5 miles down. In darkness so complete, no light had touched her since she sank. Many had searched. Many had failed. The ocean is vast and deep and keeps its secrets well. But Dr. Robert Ballard, a marine geologist and oceanographer, was determined to find her. What most people didn't know was that Ballard's expedition was not solely about Titanic. He had been recruited by the United States Navy for a secret Cold War mission to locate and photograph 2 sunken nuclear submarines, the USS Thresher and the USS Scorpion. The Navy gave him funding and time and advanced equipment, and when that mission was complete, with time remaining, Ballard turned his attention to his real passion, finding Titanic. He used a device called Argo, a remotely operated camera sled towed behind his ship, sweeping back and forth across the ocean floor, sending back grainy black and white images from the abyss. Breathe slowly and imagine that search, the anticipation. Hours of seafloor, mud and rock. Nothing, nothing. Then, September 1st, 1985. Just after midnight, a member of Ballard's team saw something on the monitor. A shape, man-made, circular, a boiler. One of Titanic's massive boilers, sitting upright on the ocean floor. They had found her. Ballard later said. He went to his cabin and wept. It was, he realized, the exact time, the exact hour, that Titanic had sunk 73 years earlier. Let that moment of discovery, of connection across time, wash over you gently. The wreck lies at a depth of 12,500 feet, 2.5 miles down, in a place of crushing pressure, near freezing temperatures and absolute darkness. The bow section, landed upright, buried 60 feet into the mud, still recognizable, majestic even in ruin. The stern section landed nearly 2,000 feet away, collapsed and broken, almost unrecognizable. Between them, a debris field, spanning miles. Shoes, dishes, bottles, luggage, chandeliers, all scattered across the seafloor, like artifacts in a museum, with no walls. But something was missing. Something you might expect to find. No human remains. Breathe and let that realization settle gently. The ocean is a powerful force. Currents, marine life, bacteria, time itself. The bodies that went down with the ship or died in the water have long since returned to the sea. Only their possessions remain. Shoes positioned as if still on feet. A poignant reminder of absence. When scientists examined the hull, they made a surprising discovery. There was no massive gash, no long tearing wound, as everyone had imagined for decades. Instead, they found something more subtle and more damning. popped rivets, fractured plates, small separations in the hull, caused by the impact with the iceberg. The iron rivets in the bow had failed. Just as we discussed, when the ship was being built, those weaker rivets made their contribution to the disaster. Evidence preserved in the cold, dark water, waiting 73 years to tell the truth. Among the wreckage, explorers found the Marconi room, the wireless telegraph, still there, still recognizable, brass fittings, etched with messages on slate, the equipment that sent those desperate calls, CQD, SOS, into the night. Silent now, forever. Picture it, covered in rust, in sediment, but still there, still bearing witness. Over the years, since Ballard's discovery, multiple expeditions have visited the site. They have recovered more than 5,000 artifacts, each one a connection to the past. A perfume vial from 1912, still sealed, the scent preserved by the cold depths. Dishes, jewelry, luggage tags with names. Items both grand and ordinary, pulled from the darkness and brought to the surface, to museums, where people can see them, touch the past. Remember. In 1994, an expedition recovered something extraordinary. A 17-ton section of the hull, cut carefully from the wreck and raised to the surface. When metallurgists examined it, they discovered the steel was brittle, more brittle than modern steel. The cold temperatures of the Atlantic had made it even more fragile. The collision in that icy water had shattered the steel like glass. Another piece of the puzzle. Another truth revealed by the evidence preserved below. Breathe deeply as we consider impermanence. The wreck is not permanent. Since its discovery, since human eyes and lights and submersibles began visiting, the deterioration has accelerated. Rust-eating bacteria, a species discovered on Titanic and named for her, Halomonas titanici, consume the iron. They form rusticles, strange rust formations, hanging like icicles from the railings and decks. Since 1985, the bacteria have been working constantly, eating the metal, breaking it down. Scientists estimate that within a few more decades, perhaps 50 years, perhaps less, Titanic will be gone. Collapsed entirely. Nothing left but a rust stain on the ocean floor. Even the artifacts, recovered and preserved, are shrinking, disintegrating, fighting to exist against time and entropy. Let yourself feel the sadness of this, and also the rightness. Everything, eventually, returns to the earth, to the sea. Nothing lasts forever. Even monuments, even memories, eventually fade. But for now, she is still there, still resting in the darkness, still telling her story to those who visit, to those who listen. Rest now as we prepare for one final story, one final connection to Titanic and her sisters. Epilogue: The Living Legacy. Before you drift away completely into sleep, let me tell you about one remarkable woman. Her name was Violet Jessop. Violet was a stewardess working aboard the great ocean liners of the White Star Line. She was aboard RMS Olympic, Titanic's older sister ship, when it collided with the HMS Hawk in 1911. The Olympic survived, limped back to port, and Violet survived her first maritime disaster. The following year, 1912, Violet was assigned to a new ship, the finest ship afloat, Titanic. On the night of April 14th, when the evacuation began, Violet was ordered into a lifeboat. She was handed a baby to care for. She climbed into lifeboat 16, holding the child, and was lowered to the water. She survived. The sinking was rescued by Carpathia and returned the baby to a woman who snatched it from her arms without a word. 2 disasters, 2 survivals. But Violet's story wasn't over. In 1916, during World War I, Violet was working as a nurse aboard HMHS Britannic, Titanic's younger sister ship, converted to a hospital ship. On November 21st, Britannic struck a mine in the Aegean Sea. The ship sank in just 55 minutes, faster even than Titanic. Violet abandoned ship, jumped from the deck into the water. She was nearly killed by one of the ship's propellers, still spinning as the vessel went down. But she survived, was pulled from the water, and lived. 3 ships, 3 sisters, Olympic, Titanic, Britannic, and Violet Jessop was aboard all 3 during their disasters. She earned a nickname that had once belonged to Titanic herself, the Unsinkable. Violet lived until 1971, dying peacefully at age 83 in her home on dry land. She had survived everything the sea could throw at her, and in surviving, she carried forward the stories, the memories, the truth of what happened on those ships, in those moments when everything changed. Let Violet's resilience, her survival, comfort you now as you drift toward sleep. Even in the darkest waters, even when all seems lost, some survive, some carry on, some live to tell the story. And now, the story has been told. Titanic, built with pride, sailed with hope, sunk in tragedy, discovered in wonder, and slowly fading back into the sea, but never forgotten, never truly gone. As long as we remember, as long as we tell the stories, she lives on. Rest now, deeply, peacefully. Let the gentle motion of imagined waves rock you to sleep. Let the stars above, that witnessed everything, watch over you as you dream. The ocean is calm, the night is peaceful, and you are safe, warm, drifting away into the deepest, most restful sleep. Good night, and sleep well. Dear listener, may your dreams be gentle.